Hi everyone, excuse me, it's William coming at you from inside the house today because it's a little chilly and I have new glasses. I in the past have never spent more than the bare minimum on reading glasses because I lose them so often. So I went a little further this time and we'll see if I can manage to be responsible with them. You'll be able to tell if that sort of thing amuses you. You can keep track of what glasses I'm wearing in future videos and know precisely how long it takes me to lose these. Okay. The other exciting thing that happened to me yesterday was I also got a new book called On the History of Destruction, and by W.G. Sebald, about the bombing, the Allied bombing of Germany during the Second World War. Already started reading it. It looks very, very interesting. Anyway, I guess maybe I'm a little jealous that Dmitri, that he's sharing his life every day in his diaries. And I don't keep a diary, but what the heck. Now you know what my definition of personal excitement is at the moment. Okay, so we are doing a very, very interesting 1915 diary entry today. I thought Dmitri was only going to be in Moscow for the weekend, but it turns out it's still going on for a few days. And still this weird juxtaposition of what he does in the morning and afternoon with what he does in the evening and at night. So our recap, the last video was from the 1939 Grunwald letter, and it kind of boiled down to the desire of the British to bring about a reconciliation between the Soviets and the emigration in their further efforts to bring Russia and the Soviet Union over to their side as allies against Germany, against Nazi Germany. And Grunwald ended it by grabbing Maria's attention and ours by saying, now I'm going to talk to you about the direct impact that this could or will have on your brother Dmitri. So that's what we'll be having in the next video. After this, our cast today in 1915, we have a man called Stepanov, we have Ella, we have Countess Belyovskaya, whom you might remember, a fellow named Matseyevsky, and the ballerina Yekaterina Geltser. So there were two sisters, and the ballerina was the famous one. Her sister, her other sister, the other sister was an actress and not as well known. Okay, so here we go. It's the 12th/25th of January. We're in Moscow, staying in room 10 at the Metropole Hotel, and it's 1 degree, not below freezing, but just 1 degree and overcast. So that's the weather report. Here we go. I got up around 11 o'clock. It was frightfully difficult after yesterday's late supper, but I was afraid that Stepanov, whom I had invited to lunch, would notice my condition, and if that happened, he would be terribly shocked. Mikhail Petrovich arrived at 1 o'clock. We sat in my room a while, then went downstairs for lunch. The food was disgusting. Around 3 o'clock, I went back up to my room and received Lieutenant Matseyevsky from the 2nd Rifle Regiment, who had received an officer's George Award, so a George's Cross. Around 3:15, I went to see Auntie. She was again very sweet. We talked about my conversation of the previous day with Countess Belyovskaya. At 5 o'clock, I went home and took a nap. Around 9 o'clock, I went to Prague, which was a restaurant, to have dinner in a private room with Geltser. We stayed there until 3 o'clock a.m. It was surprisingly interesting. She said a lot, but asked even more. And now we're going from Russian to English. At the end, we finished by kissing, although we did not do more, to say quite frankly. I doubt with her so much, but certainly she is an interesting woman with quite peculiar ideas about love, life, and art. That's what is nice in her. All right, so that's it for this diary entry. Quite an interesting turn of events at the end there. So who was Stepanov, Mikhail Petrovich, the one whom Dmitri was anxious not to shock, who was afraid that if he saw him in such a hungover condition, that this man would be, as he puts it, shocked. I find it hard to believe that if this man knew anything about Dmitri at all, or had heard anything about what he was up to lately, that he would actually have been shocked. But anyway, he was someone from Dmitri's childhood. He was a man in his 60s, his early 60s. He was a military man. He'd been an adjutant to Grand Duke Sergei, and then after Sergei's death had continued on as part of the household, but now attached to Ella. And he was a member of the Orthodox Palestine Society, which was this club or this organization that was very dear to the heart of Grand Duke Sergei. So Dmitri would have known him, as I said, since childhood. And it's, a man in his 60s. He doesn't want to be embarrassed in front of Mikhail Petrovich Stepanov. Poor Stepanov would die in 1917. Uh-oh, my little dog has bronchitis. All right, Crispin. So anyway, he would die in 1917. I don't know the circumstances, but I would imagine they were, it was not natural causes. Okay, so Dmitri says they have lunch there at the hotel, and Dmitri says that the food is disgusting. It's a big, famous, luxurious hotel, and so it makes me wonder if Dmitri, if he was still having stomach trouble, or more to the point, if he was still unable to taste. You remember that he'd mentioned that before, that he'd lost his sense of taste. So the next person he sees is a person he didn't know, at least not well, maybe knew him in passing, and he received him in his hotel room. And this was kind of a semi-official thing. This was a very young man of 21 or 22, so not very young in comparison to Dmitri himself, who was 23, but he was a lieutenant, as Dmitri tells us. Oh, Lord, what is wrong with people? Okay, Lieutenant Matseyevsky, Sergei Pavlovich. And unlike Dmitri, Sergei Pavlovich was a real warrior. Dmitri would have done better in diplomacy or in government ministry or something like that. He wasn't. He wasn't really keen on warfare. Crispin. Okay. But this man, whether he was keen on warfare or not, he was quite a heroic figure. He was not in the same battle as Dmitri, but at the same time, in the same operation, the invasion of East Prussia in 1914, in August 1914. He had behaved very heroically in a battle there. Sort of, it sounds like, in the dispatches, kind of single-handedly, somehow putting out of operation three German artillery pieces, if you can imagine. And he was from the 2nd Rifle Regiment, the 2nd Guards Rifle Regiment, which had been Dmitri's. Dmitri had been the honorary commander of this regiment since 1905, when he was a little guy. After Sergei's death, the emperor made him the honorary commander of the 2nd Guards Rifle Battalion. Now he's saying regiment, maybe because of the war. And you remember, if you were watching the diary entries, the videos for 1906, how Dmitri, one of his first real activities was to lead this battalion in a review. and he was so nervous about that, but it went really well. And so anyway, yeah, this was his regiment in a sense. And so, he received this man who just received, even though the action had taken place on the 26th of August, it had taken a while, and he just on the 3rd of January received his George's Cross. And now it was the 12th of January, and I don't know why he was in Moscow, but yeah, I mean, Dmitri received him. I don't know if it was suggested by anyone that he should, or if that was a decision he made himself. He received him in the hotel room. He didn't give him much time. So he says this happened at 3 o'clock, and by 3:15 he was going to see Ella. So it was just sort of, I suppose, a handshaking, well done kind of a thing. And odd thinking of this, 21-year-old and 23-year-old meeting under these circumstances. And poor Matseyevsky would end up being shot in 1919 during the Civil War. Again, I don't know the circumstances, but clearly not good. And then, so on this day, with this man who only has 4 years to live and who's a little younger than Dmitri, they see each other, they shake hands, and then Dmitri, ends up going off and spending the evening making out with a ballerina. Yeah, there we go. Judge not, lest you be judged. Okay, so after that, he goes to see Ella. Again, he notes in his diary that she's nice to him. She's nice to him again. Maybe he's expecting her to have gotten word of what he's been up to and to say, "All right, my boy, you need to knock this off." But no, she's pleasant. She's nice. They talk about Countess Belyovskaya, the wife of the son of Grand Duke Alexei Alexandrovich, and apparently Dmitri has already told us that when this man decided that he wanted a divorce from Countess Belyovskaya, he applied through Ella, thinking that she would use her influence, apparently, to get him this divorce. People are allowed to divorce in the Orthodox Church. You get three shots at it. You can be married and divorced 3 times, but you cannot, after the 3rd time, you cannot remarry. You can't take a 4th wife. I guess, the church figures you're not cut out for marriage. You need to stop doing this. Okay, so anyway, and the wife had been a lady in waiting to Ella, and the husband, this natural son of Grand Duke Alexei, had been attached to Sergei. And so you had these little families. In every royal household, you had these little families of the people at court and with military attachments and the servants. And in the case of Sergei and Ella, it was probably even more tight-knit because they were isolated from the rest of the family. Sergei had been the governor general of Moscow, and he'd been at odds with a lot of members of the family, and so he'd kept himself sort of at a distance from them in Moscow. And after he died, Ella, in becoming a nun, in taking orders, had done the same and had remained also in Moscow. So this was their little family group. Okay, so then he's done with the respectable things of the day, so Dmitri goes off to another famous restaurant, Prague restaurant in Moscow. It's still in existence. It's a very grand building. I've been to Moscow, but I've never been to Prague. Anyway, it was the kind of place that a Grand Duke would go, and presumably also the people that a Grand Duke likes to hang out with, these theater people. Nastya doesn't make an appearance. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? She was the one that Dmitri contacted when he was still in Usovo to say, "I'm coming to Moscow," and she's been in every diary entry since then, except this one. This time, he's not getting together either with Nastya or with this group of theater friends. He's actually getting together simply alone with Yekaterina Geltser. They get a private room at Prague, and she's a 38-year-old woman. She is a divorcee, I believe. It's hard to find the exact date. She'd been married to another ballet dancer, and at some point they had divorced, although they remained close and they remained dance partners. But, this is so typical of Dmitri. He wants a woman who's, around at least 10 and maybe around 15, even 20 years older than him. 20 was pushing it a little bit. That was mainly with Missy. I'm not sure how much older she was, but she was old enough to be his mother. Yekaterina Geltser is not old enough to be his mother, but from the perspective of a 23-year-old, she's practically a middle-aged woman, but that's what he liked. So, and interestingly enough, she would stay in Russia, and she would continue to be, after the revolution, and she would continue to be a celebrated dancer. So she would be a celebrated Soviet dancer, and there are statues to her and that sort of thing. Yeah, so what happened? Well, my guess is that Dmitri made a pass at her. And, it worked to a certain extent. They kissed. And this happens a lot in his diaries with a lot of different women, and he uses the same, almost word for word, always the same language. We kissed, but we didn't do anything else. And he also uses the word interesting when he's talking about sex or making out. So here he uses the word interesting to say that what happened was surprisingly interesting. Okay, so that means, yeah, there was some hanky-panky. But he also then again uses the word interesting to talk about, they weren't only making out, they also had this conversation that he was kind of fascinated by. She's an interesting woman with quite peculiar ideas about love, life, and art, and that's what he likes about her. That's what's nice about her. And that also was typical for him. He was definitely wanting the sex and the making out, but he didn't tend to want to be with women who were sort of vapid, If that was all he wanted, he would go out and get a sex worker, a prostitute. But when it came to these older women, he liked them to have, their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own point of view. And so that was an attraction to him. That at least is to his credit, I would say. Now, when he says in English, I dealt with her so much, but certainly she is an interesting woman. Well, I was being a bit lazy today because I'm wondering if doubt is actually the word she used, because I'm working from the transcript sent to me by my Russian colleagues, and they don't always, just like me with Russian, that if I see a sort of dubious word in Russian, my guess isn't always correct. And it might be that in English it's the same with them, and it might be that doubt is not the word that he used. And in order to figure that out, I'm going to have to go take my microfilm reels, because I haven't digitized 1915, and I'm going to have to take them to the library and look on the microfilm reader, and I just didn't have time to do that, and I didn't want to put this off. But if that is indeed the word, and he said, I dealt with her so much, then it would be, I have my doubts about her. But certainly she is an interesting woman. So what kind of doubts, I don't know. He maybe doubted that the relationship would go anywhere, although what he would have wanted was not really a relationship. He loved to have these kinds of women around him whom he was attracted to, but also it didn't really end up being a love affair. It's just they were people he could talk to. He was much more interested in, or much more willing to sort of let his reserve, let his guard down a little bit and talk to them about ideas that he had and ideas that they had. Another one was the actress Tima. Sometimes it's spelled Time, T-I-M-E, sometimes T-I-M-M-E. He talks about bearing his soul to her. And another one was Linda Thomas, who ended up marrying Cole Porter, and she was the one that he credits with sort of introducing him to New Thought. But anyway, these older women were really important to him as people he could confide in and get some emotional support from. And yeah, he tended to need to make passes at women and see how receptive they would be with that. But as I say, almost word for word, this is what he ends up saying. Oh, we kissed. We finished by kissing, he says. So, yeah, a little bit of making out in this private room. What do we have next time? Well, going back to 1939, and we're finally getting into the meat of how it involves Dmitri. And we're going to talk about the situation in Ukraine with the Nazis' ambitions for taking over Ukraine and making it a German puppet state. And we're going to talk about how Vladimir, Cyril's son, who was now called Grand Duke, not legitimate in my opinion, but that he was, you know, as the supposed head of the family, how he was approaching this whole thing with the Nazis, and how Dmitri felt about it. And in fact, Dmitri gave a series of interviews in order to make his position clear, and in order to say my position is overall the family position. So we're going to get started with that, and very, very interesting stuff. And Moscow will continue to be very interesting, so be sure and come back, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.